Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Thanks to the many friends who once again kept my body and spirit nourished. Special thanks to Paul Nagano, in whose Boston studio this book was born, and to Mike Dively, in whose Key West cottage it grew. Thanks also is David Stockton and Roland Godry of Boston and their associates for sharing their expertise in opera production. Likewise, thanks to Adam Harris of San Francisco. And finally, with all respects, thanks to El Signor Verdi for his great legacy to all divas and their disciples. Chapter 1. I should have known better. All the signs were there. I should have gone straight to Italy as planned, but I figured working the wigs for the first season of the New England Summer Opera Festival would be easy, glamorous work. I'd be breathing fresh air instead of the recycled fumes of Newbury Street Salon. I'd be among real celebrities instead of so many back bay pretenders, and my aesthetic talents would be challenged far more than any Beacon Hill dowager had required of them lately. To top it off, I debt myself a tidy little bundle to spend in Italy later on. The train should have been my first warning. No silvery, sleek Metroliners depart from Boston's North Station. The commuter rail is more like the livestock local, cramped and decrepit, better suited for the outer bounds of Siberia than a regal excursion to the opera. The coach was especially stifling that day, jammed with noisy people, eager to escape from the city to the North Shore on the first Sunday in June. Beach chairs and beverage coolers blocked the aisles. Tote bags and straw hats spilled from the overhead racks, and adults and children hovered everywhere, yakking and whining and sparring nonstop. I was lucky to be getting off at the next town, Abigail by the Sea, the oceanside hamlet where the new opera festival was based. The riffraff would stay on to the end of the line, or so I thought. The train rounded a shallow curve and blew its whistle as if to recall the lost romance of the rails. The conductor announced, "Abigail," and we headed into the once sleepy town that would soon be a shrine to international opera and all its worshippers. Relief, comfort, and luxury were just moments away. But as the train approached the station, it jolted and screeched to a halt, throwing many of the standing passengers off their feet. A large man in a soiled, sweaty shirt fell onto me, and I cringed at his rank wetness. The conductor ordered everyone to remain seated, which seemed pointless since so many people either had no seat or were now sprawled on the floor. The coach became eerie and still, as things do in the first moments after a catastrophe. There was a communal sense of something gone badly wrong. 20 suffocating minutes later, we learned that we would have to vacate the train and walk along the rail bed for the remaining distance to the station. And then we all saw what had stopped the train. A young woman had apparently thrown herself onto the rails and, like that tragic Russian heroine, had been decapitated. The local police had already set up barriers around the first two coaches, but it was easy, too easy, to peer beyond them and catch glimpses of the body, sans head. First the train ride, and now this. Inside the small station house, which had been freshly painted and restored in honor of the opera festival, the townsfolk were quickly gathered. Oh, the horror, the tragedy, the delicious scandal. I gathered enough snippets of various conversations to learn that the young woman had been a singer, a local soprano, who had failed to get a part in the festival. Poor thing, they said. Such a voice, such promise. Announcements informed us that shuttle buses would arrive to take the holiday travelers to towns further north along the coast, but I had already reached my destination. The Sydney Bluestein Center for the Performing Arts, brand new. Never been used before. Located just outside Abigail's Town Center. I left the station and scanned the main street for a taxi, but with no luck. Then I heard the sound of a car horn, a four-note chord in perfect tune. I turned toward the sound and saw a petite, silver-haired woman waving from the driver's seat of an immense cardinal red convertible. The top was down, exposing to the New England elements 4 plump seats upholstered in soft leather, near white, and trimmed with red piping to match the car's bold lacquer paint. "Jonathan!" cried the small woman. "Me? My name is Stan." I looked behind me. No one was there. "Jonathan!" she called out again in a high, raspy voice. She motioned me toward the car, so I went. She smiled brightly at me, although her eyes were concealed by wraparound sunglasses as dark as a bandit's mask. "I forgot to send word," she said. "Parker stopped driving last month. Can you imagine? I expected some kind of natural calamity would follow, but the only thing that happened is that I'm driving myself now." I stared blankly at her. She was easily over 70 years old, spare as a sparrow, and pale, wearing a white cotton sundress with big black polka dots. She would have been idling on a boulevard in Monte Carlo, awaiting some prince to dash from a casino laden with bounty and settle in next to her. "Well, get in," she said. "Let's go." "But we'll send the jitney to pick up the rest of your bags." "But..." "Quick now, lunch will be ready." Why argue? I placed my 2 pieces of luggage on the back seat, then opened the door, the automotive equivalent of a Swiss bank vault, and settled myself into the seat. Aromatic leather enveloped me like those ponderous armchairs in gentlemen's clubs in London and Boston. The woman eased the heavy car away from the curb and slid it into the traffic lane. Oblivious to the oncoming cars, we just avoided a collision, and I bristled. She seemed to be looking everywhere but in front of her, and she seemed to be having trouble seeing. Maybe her chic, opaque sunglasses were part of the problem. "What is all this hubbub around the station?" she said. I told her there'd been an accident on the tracks. "Oh dear," she said. "Was it serious?" "A young woman apparently killed herself." "Oh dear!" The woman shook her head. "Well, there isn't much we can do for her now." She drove the big convertible at a deplorable crawl along the main street, allowing it to weave languidly in response to her tendency to turn the steering wheel in whatever direction her gaze fell at the moment. Toward a colorful shop window on the left, toward a pedestrian couple strolling along on the right, toward me sitting beside her, and ever obedient, the car meandered gracefully to the whim of her visual attention. An oncoming vehicle honked loudly at us, and the woman swerved us back into our lane of traffic. She said, "What an unfortunate welcome for you, Jonathan." "Ma'am, my name isn't Jonathan." She smiled. "Oh, don't worry. I know most theater people have stage names." I'm Stan Kraychik," I said. "You're Czech, then," she said, as elated as if she had discovered America. "Yes, but..." "Well, it's no wonder you took a British identity. It makes international work so much easier. Although I love Czech theater. It's so daring and dynamic. Would you prefer me to use your real name?" She faced me again. The car followed the direction of her eyes and veered slightly to the right. I was just about to put my hand on the steering wheel when she swerved us back on course. "No," I said, "as long as you're comfortable with it." "Whatever you like," she replied. What I would have liked was to know who Jonathan was, and who she was too, for that matter. The woman said, "I know it's an outrage to own a car like this, especially with the economy so uncertain. But when Sid died 2 years back, my dear, I had no idea how wealthy my second husband was. Frozen foods, of all things. And then Parker failed his eye examination last month, and, well, here I am driving again." I'm afraid that... Oh, don't be, she replied. I'm quite capable. She pressed her hand warmly over my forearm. And I've always wanted something sporty. I gave up on the identity crisis for the moment and tried to share her delight with her new car. What is it exactly? Don't you know? It's a Bentley, dear. A Bentley Continental. It's made in your country by the Rolls-Royce people. But it's much faster. Turbocharged, they say, but you'd never know by the way I drive, always below the limit. It's the one place where I just can't seem to break the rules. How nice that you're here, Jonathan. Ma'am, you've really mistaken me for someone else. The woman turned her gaze toward me, and once again the car followed her line of vision. She lowered the sunglasses away from her eyes. They were a clear, pale blue. She studied me with the alertness of a fox. This time, I did casually place my hand on the leather-wrapped steering wheel to keep us in our line. Now that I look at you, she said, you don't look quite like Jonathan Byers at all. You have the red hair, but I tried to tell you, and you're so much better mannered than I remember. There are some who would disagree. Oh, well, she said, then laughed heartily. It seems I've made a big mistake. How do you do? I'm Daphne Davenport. Daphne Davenport. Was that a real name, or was I caught in John Waters' hallucination of Some Like It Hot? I'm Stan Kraychik, I said. Yes, you told me, you naughty boy. Did you just want to ride my new car? I wouldn't blame you one bit. Actually, I was looking for a taxi. Daphne lifted her sunglasses back over her eyes. Well, now that we've met, would you like to have lunch with me? Sure, I said. People have sex knowing less about each other. But I'm supposed to report for work at the Opera House. Daphne said, I think they'll make an exception if they know you're with me. I am the opera festival after all. I looked at her askance. I was still steering us. My second husband was Sid Bluestein, she said. As in the Sidney Bluestein Center for the Performing Arts? That's right, dear. You could say I own the plantation. She laughed again. She seemed to be amused with her own life. But you just said your name is Davenport. Yes, that was my first husband's name, and I liked the sound of it so much that I kept it through my second marriage. Well then, I said, if it's not any trouble, let's have lunch. No false courtesy with me, young man. We'll have a nice time, and pity poor Jonathan, who's missing all this fun. Daphne pulled a small telephone handset from the console between us. I wondered what might have happened if I hadn't been steering the car for the last few minutes. She punched in some numbers on the phone and waited a few moments. Then she spoke in a loud voice, fairly yelling into the small handset. Parker, tell Marazzo to pick up Sir Jonathan at the train station. She paused and said, Yes, I've missed him, but I've got someone else with me, so there'll be one more for lunch. What? I can't hear you. Oh, never mind. Then she slid the telephone back into the console. Imagine that, she said. Me using a car phone. Times really have changed. Once again, Daphne laughed, and then she finally brushed my hand from the steering wheel. Thank you, dear, she said. I'll take over now. She aimed the big Bentley onto a winding road that climbed upwards high above the water. The Bentley was perfectly at home, tracing the craggy coastline, just as it might have been along the Grande Corniche that skims the hilly coast of Monaco. But that late spring day, it was the Atlantic Ocean that hypnotized me, and with the noonday sun on my head, I was lulled into a dreamy torpor. I thought of my lover Rafik, who was en route to Europe. He was the one who had insisted that I take the gig with the opera festival. It would supposedly look good on my curriculum vitae. I protested that hairdressers don't have such things. But as usual, Rafik charmed me into his way of thinking. We would rendezvous in Paris, where I was to meet his parents. They know he's gay, and they're cool enough about it, but then he's never been espoused before. Etymologists compare enslaved, ensnared, and ensnarled. And since Rafik is the elder male scion of a dynasty of Epicurean food exporters, they may not be ready for a working-class American son-in-law who does hair. Whatever the outcome of our Paris summit, we would continue to friends together, guest of a duchessa, no less. But that's another story. I also thought of my best friend Nicole, who owns Snip's salon, where I usually work. She had grumbled enough about giving me time off for the vacation in Italy, but when I was invited to do wigs for the opera festival, she agreed to give me that time as well, probably because she'd figured I'd be working at least. Nicole tends to view the work ethic as just one more supervisory role for her. But she did agree to board Sugar Baby, my taupe-colored Burmese cat, the same hue as the candy, even though Nikki is adamant that animals have no place in a household. Daphne's voice intruded on my mental meanderings. "Are you a singer?" "No," I replied lazily. "I'm assisting with the wigs." "You're a hairdresser, then?" "Yes." "How nice," she replied, and somehow conveyed in those two words a sincerity and kindness that neutralized all the nasty things anyone has ever said or thought about male hairstylists. Daphne chattered on, and I'm thrilled that the festival is finally coming to fruition. It was Sid's wish, too. Even though the poor dear hated opera, but he did insist that I do something for the arts when he died. I think he would have liked this festival. It's ecumenical. Is that the right word? I've insisted on singers and musicians of all ages from all countries. I want to create the spirit of a new Verona or a new Spalato, not another Lake George. We have a wonderful lineup of opera. Verdi's Angelo in Mascalba, Puccini's La Bohème, Mozart's Die Zauberflöte, and my concession to a modern work, PDQ, Bach's The Stoned Guest. Oh, but I'm boring you. Not at all, I said half-heartedly, for I am hardly an opera buff. Daphne continued. It's quite a program, and the performance center came out beautifully. I insisted on hiring an Italian architect whose specialty is designing opera houses. It's a rare person who can balance beauty and function on both sides of the proscenium, and it's got the latest technology, too. Have you seen the opera house yet, dear? No, of course you haven't. Well, you'll see plenty of it soon enough. By the way, I said abruptly, changing the conversational track. Who is Jonathan Bayers? Don't you know? Said Daphne with a chortle. Sir Jonathan Byers is the stage director for our main production, Verdi's Angelo in Mascara. A masked ball. Do you know it? A bit, I said. My lover had forced it on me. Wonderful opera, said Daphne. And we've got a wonderful cast. We're doing it in the original Italian, of course, and Sir Jonathan Daphne let out a small whoop. Well, some say he goes straight for the jugular, and he certainly does do and say some very controversial things. But he's not like those brats who insinuate their own silliness into someone else's work. Sir Jonathan seems to be on a quest to purify the music, to hack away at the layers of interpretation that have congealed over the years since the composer wrote it. He's quite an idealist and an absolute beast. I've met him only once, and he does behave rather badly, not at all well-mannered like you, but I hardly consider him dangerous, except perhaps to one's own calcified thinking. Daphne completed her peroration just in time to turn the Bentley onto the long, curving driveway that led up to the front of a sprawling old summer mansion. Here we are, she said, sounding oddly triumphant. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.